Well, hello and welcome to the final panel. We are going to be talking about M&A activity, which of course there hasn't been a great deal of in the psychedelics medicine industry thus far. A couple of sort of small deals which have happened. But my guests will be talking about their views in terms of what we're likely to see in the space over the next couple of years. So I'm very pleased to welcome Lee Dawkin, Kris Miks and Ashley Chiu. Lee, maybe a little bit about your background, and then we'll hand over to Ashley, and then we'll move over to Kris. Maybe we'll go with you first, Ashley, if you can maybe just sort of touch on your background.
Sure, no problem. So thanks for inviting me here to speak today. I've spent about 3 years now in the cannabis space and, advising clients with their strategy, doing some due diligence in M&A. So anything to do with commercial or operational diligence, that would be me and my team. And because of the growing interest with psychedelics, naturally our cannabis clients are also interested in the space. So we do a lot of work to assess the market, develop their strategy, and help them fundraise. And that's, the breadth of my experience in the sector so far.
Fantastic. Kris, we'll let you tell people what you've been up to.
Sounds good. So my name's Kris Miks. I'm a partner at Norton Fulbright Canada in Toronto. I've been involved in the cannabis space probably for about the last 5 years, acting for a number of clients, both on the licensed producer side and in a variety of other spaces, including when it was still legal and easily done in Canada, the marketing and advertising space. I'm an M&A and corporate finance lawyer by trade, so I've worked with companies from both early stage, including their formation and early stage funding, right through their going public, and also later stage public M&A, where they've sold to other competitors or they've acquired private entities. I've been involved in all aspects of the space, and like Ashley, we've seen a number of clients start looking towards psychedelics, and I have the luxury of working with one of the an early stage psychedelic company that is looking to raise capital and find a target company to acquire. So that's allowed me to gain a lot of insight and exposure to the space.
Thank you, Kris. Patrick, have we managed to re-establish connection with Lee?
I've just sent him the call-in number. I can see him here. His video's not showing up. Lee, if you can hear us, do you want to just clap twice? Sounds like a no. I'm sure he'll get an email and call in shortly.
Fantastic. Kris, I'm going to just pick things up with you. So we've started to see small amounts of M&A activity taking place. What sort of if you were to sort of talk through your experience of what you saw in the cannabis space, what do you think will be similar? What do you think will be different? And how do you see the transactions flowing in terms of?
Sorry, there's someone.
No worries.
Can I get to repeat the last 10 seconds there? There was a.
Yeah, absolutely. You started to see the first M&A activity, which is taking place. Can you give us a flavour for what that looks like? But what kind of really important, I was trying to get a feel for how do you see this evolving? What's the what do you think the M&A activity is going to look like in 3 years, 5 years? What types of deals will be out there? Will it be big pharma who are coming in, buying up these smaller R&D companies? Will they start to absorb each other? What do you see? What direction of travel do you see?
So it's interesting. In the early stages, yeah, we can hear you.
Sorry, guys. Please continue.
So in the early stages, I think we follow early stage cannabis, where issuers and companies are buying other companies in the space or looking to get a toehold, and it's heavily regulated, being a medicinal industry. And I think we can see a lot of companies that are going to focus solely on how to get a toehold in, but we're also going to see people who weren't early on into cannabis wanting to get in early because they missed the boat. So you mentioned large pharma. I think there's going to be more of an appetite, more of an interest from large pharma to get into the space early and see if they can get involved and start putting money into research and development of psychedelics early on, because of their application being primarily medicinal as opposed to the heavy recreational use that you saw in cannabis. And I think we'll see more early movers in the space and more competition for M&A. I remember when cannabis first started becoming regulated, we saw a lot of people who were like, didn't really ever think it was going to become a true industry. And it really wasn't until I believe it was Deloitte published their statistics of what they saw the potential size of the market being, where people started to really take note and want to get into the space in earnest. Whereas I think a lot of investors, a lot of companies, and a lot of parties focused on medicine, stakeholders in the industry, are going to want to take an earlier approach this time around.
So, if you're, working with a company and they're starting to sort of, get those inquisitive first signs that someone may be interested in buying them, maybe give us a feel for, talking to an entrepreneur, what's going to happen in that sort of M&A process? What's it going to feel like when somebody goes a little bit beyond, we like you, are you for sale? What follows after that?
Yeah, so typically the company would put in a letter of intent and likely would have an exclusivity period where the potential acquirer would do their due diligence, financial, tax, operational, commercial. I mean, at this early stage, what we found is due diligence isn't, what you would typically see in a more mature company. And so with a company that doesn't have a lot of, operational experience, it really depends on, the management team, the key personnel, what type of experience does this team have to make, the potential acquirer think that they're a good company to pursue. And after that, there's typically, the negotiation and a closing phase, contingent on, due diligence going well. But to Kris's point earlier, I think I would take the opposite view that I think big pharma, similar to what they're seeing in cannabis, I think there's still, there's still a roadblock when it comes to stigma. There's a lot that they don't know. And I mean, psychedelics and, psilocybin, it's not necessarily a new molecule. There was certainly early research in the 1960s before, prohibition and stigma washed over the industry, much like cannabis. And so I think there's still going to take a lot of education on that front. And, in our conversations and when we advise big pharma, a lot of the time, they're not as interested in that first mover advantage because they've seen what is unfolded in cannabis. I mean, in their typical drug development pipeline, they would typically, roll any type of development cost into, how they size the future opportunity. And so whether that's coming in and acquiring later or developing it themselves, I think they're quite indifferent. I think, with the wave of distress that we've seen in cannabis, I would actually say that they're a little bit more wary about, entering in what we would think is an emerging market.
Now, thank you, Ashley. Now, given that there is scope for a lot more sort of protected activity by virtue of, say, patents and protocols, do you think that could potentially tempt them to sort of get a little bit earlier if somebody has got something which is, genuinely very, very defensible?
Of course. And I think that is going through the due diligence to see, is there prior art? What is this, piece of intellectual property? I've found that a lot of, companies use that phrase, but maybe it's just a bit of a trade secret that, at the end of the day isn't protectable. And of course, that's really their business model. I mean, pharma is big. They move a little more slowly. And so I think it's actually part of, their pipeline to acquire biotech companies that do have promising innovations. And really, it's going to come for, when the company is able to prove out the innovation or the patent themselves.
Thank you. And just to sort of to wrap up on this piece, if on a small transaction in the M&A space, how long would you expect that sort of process to run? And maybe, that's somebody who's selling for, 50 to a low couple of $100 million, but maybe then sort of to give it a sort of a different framing, when we hopefully will see in years to come, so-and-so with a name of a plant in it, has been sold for several billion. How long do you think that sort of, what would you see as a sort of a timeline on those type of processes?
Yeah, I mean, from what we've seen, it could be a couple of months, frankly, because, it does take the executive buy-in, it takes the board buy-in and approval for the transaction to even be approved and go through. But the one thing I'll say about due diligence is that, by rushing it, I don't think that it does the acquirer any benefit, just because, in the end, if you overpay for an asset or a company and the commercialization opportunities just don't come to fruition in the way that you thought, or you overpay, a lot of that value becomes intangible and sits as goodwill on your balance sheet. And what happens after that point is, every year you'll have to evaluate, what is my current status? Are my assets, generating the revenue and value that I had thought? And if the answer is no, you'll start to see a lot of impairment and write-downs. And it's the same type of theme that we've seen in cannabis.
Okay, thank you very much.
And I think just to add to Ashley's point on M&A and the timelines, like a lot of it also depends on the target and what they've done to get ready for M&A. M&A in itself is a process once you have someone who's at the door and willing to buy, but there's a lot of things that can be done up front. And if you have them done, it speeds up M&A. Except if you don't have them done, especially in a regulated industry, it slows down M&A a lot. Because if you're having to go back and cross your T's and dot your I's and reform your minute books, your shareholder base and all of that stuff, before you can step forward and go through with the transaction, you can add months onto your transaction timelines.
Thank you. In fact, you're almost like you're reading my mind, because my question actually, my view was, what can a company do aside to having solid corporate governance and good record keeping and shareholder registers which are well maintained? What would you be saying to a company who's saying, I think we're going to be acquired? What's the kind of key things that they really need to be getting ready for as that sort of process starts to look like it could occur?
So happy to go first. You flagged the big ones. The record keeping is going to be one of the biggest ones, and that goes down to making sure you have your legal documents in order, making sure that your contracts are in place and you're not relying simply on oral contracts, and you actually have written agreements with your counterparties. In addition to those items, I think it's important to understand what approvals you need in connection with M&A and how to get them. It's very important for companies to get to know their stakeholders and who they're going to go to and who they're going to talk to. Like often, especially in early stage companies, there's new large shareholders or people that are given specific or special rights, and they have vetoes or blocks, or they're in touch with a large group of shareholders who can block a transaction. I think it's really important for management and the board of directors to know their stakeholders and know what their stakeholders are expecting and what they will be willing to accept before they're out and having discussions with potential acquirers.
Thank you. And actually, just to that point, I'm going to frame this to sort of Ashley now. When a sort of an M&A transaction, goes well, and the announcement is made, what tends to make sort of transactions fall off the table? What are the key things that you see, and the kind of the real the pitfalls of kind of that M&A process?
Sure. I mean, with respect to the announcement, I think assuming that the investors will just understand why you're acquiring a company and why you paid what you paid, I think is misleading. You certainly need to put that strategy out there and put your story out there, otherwise someone will tell it for you. And just having very clear reasons and identifying those synergies. And so with respect to failures, I mean, I think there's also an assumption that just because you combine or acquire a company that you'll be easily able to combine them. And that's just not the case. You have to start to think about, how will these companies actually work together? Whose roles and responsibilities are what? You have to think about, how do we communicate? How do we integrate our even just IT systems so that we have the right financial information when we need it? Understanding different processes so that you're not doing one thing at one company and then doing something different at another and having no oversight. And when it comes to melding the workforce, just like proper communication and support from the top when it comes to recognizing the importance of these initiatives, I think is really important. When companies acquire and kind of just leave them to
Locked in the basement,
survive on their own. Exactly. We see that fall apart a lot. And so I think those are some things to consider for sure.